Today I have to make quite of a confession. I made a big mistake when creating tracking plans over the last, I don't know, 7, 8 years. And here's my big mistake. I defined too many events. So the tracking plan became really, really big depending on what kind of applications we were looking on. I mean, if it was a simple app, fine, nothing really serious happens. But especially for big software as a service applications, I mean, we ended up with 40 to 50 different kind of events and a lot of properties. And I'm pretty sure every developer who had to implement the stuff that I was defining in the end hated me. And I think they are right. In the end, this was not the right concept. And I will tell you what was the problem with this kind of concept and why I think we should do less tracking events and creating a kind of hierarchy into our tracking plans to keep everyone in good mood and really move forward with really great data. So have fun to watch this. Okay, so here's the problem. I'm doing tracking plans for over 8, even 10 years, you can say. And especially I would say until last year, usually the approach to do a tracking plan was basically like, okay, we look at the application that we need to do the tracking for, and then within this application, we basically then figure out, okay, what are the main areas? So what are the important product features where maybe people interact a lot? And so, of course, I did not go so deep that I said, okay, if someone clicks here, we do this. If someone clicks here, we do this, and so on. Definitely a little bit higher layer or level. But still, I mean, each feature that was present within these kind of apps were covered because I wanted to make sure that the product teams that later work with these kind of tracking data and that was based on the tracking plan, they have insights into all the different kind of features they're working on. And so, but we already come to the point where you can recognize where's the problem. And this is like the point working with. And so what I really discovered when I was trying to figure out, okay, what is going wrong with tracking plans is like, there is a clear hierarchy of the different kind of events, and especially within the area, when do I work with the data? And some tracking events are so essential, so core, that you work with them all the time. And some of them are important at specific times, but not all the time. And so maybe they don't need to be implemented in first place, and maybe they can be implemented later. And then there are even tracking events which are so huge in volume that serve a specific purpose, but only for this purpose. And so maybe they should never show up in a tracking plan. And so I want to present how I do it now and to show you with what kind of hierarchy I'm working on. And this kind of hierarchy helps you, when you create your tracking plans, to keep everyone in good mood and good intentions. So even like all the developers and so on who are frustrated by implementing, 40, 50 events. Trust me, of course, it's technically not so difficult to do, but it's a lot of work to basically really figuring out, implementing 40 or 50 events and maintaining them. So we should not forget maintaining. This is a huge problem. So let me show you my approach. So what I'm doing is basically I'm implementing everything in basically I classify events now in 3 big areas. One is I call core business events. The other one I would call product events. And the next one I call UX events. And so let's go through it. Core business events. You could also say AKA the marketing funnel events. These kind of events are basically describing how customers and users go through your whole application, and basically like how your typical customer lifecycle would look like. So this, I think, it's not so hard to figure out. So in the end, you have a clear path where you want your users to go. So they may land on your website, at some point sign up for something, and then, I don't know, started to use your application, and then at some point do a subscription, invite their whole team, invite their whole company, and I don't know, post about you on LinkedIn. So there is always some kind of funnel that you can define that is basically covering your, let's say, really like customer lifetime journey. And so this is what we cover here. And the cool thing about this is, like, in that case, we end up with, let's say, I don't know, 10, 12 events. This is quite nice. And so, for example, so just to give a quick example, is like when we look into new software. I'm not so familiar with it yet. Here we go. So let's take Dropbox. Core business flow. So for core business flow, we have something. So we have an account. So an account can be created and so on. So that would be a first step. Then we have files. So files can be uploaded or deleted or shared and something like this. So this can match other core business events. And then we might have storage. And so storage can be extended, also important event and so on. And then you have a subscription. So at some point, I mean, here is the upgrade. And as you can see, I haven't had a subscription. So here they want me to click here at some point and to upgrade. And so this is basically the core event flow of Dropbox. And so if you just track this, you can already steer your company. And this is, I mean, perfect. If you're a startup, implement this and all good. So you're definitely ready to give your investors basically the right data, and you can steer your company. You can operate on your company on data every day, every week. You just look on your core metric funnels. You can create cohorts based on that. Excellent. And so going into the structure again. And so product events are usually based on product features in the end. So let's say a sign-up process. Sign-up flow can be a product feature. And with product events, you definitely go one level deeper. And so you really want to know how people interact with this kind of product feature. So on the sign-up flow, you want to measure every step. So of course you want to do this. And maybe in some important places, maybe you want to also measure form behavior. So form behavior is a tricky one. I mean, it's already very detailed. Maybe it's not so important, but we can move this over to the X events. And so we come to them in a second. And so the interesting thing about product events is like, they have some kind of seasonality, which is quite interesting. So the seasonality in that kind of space for events is basically like, they are interesting in some kind of period of time, usually when the product team is working on them. And product teams never work on all features at the same time unless they are pretty big. I mean, pretty big product teams maybe work on every feature every time, but even then, I don't think so. And so the interesting thing is like, if you work on this feature at the moment, so of course, like maybe you do some refinements to your sign-up flow. Of course, like you add tracking with the feature deployment. And so by that, you make sure that you can analyze this feature performance over the next, let's say, 2 to 6 months. So, I mean, 6 months is really long. So I guess, let's say, 2 to 3 months is totally fine to figure out, okay, the changes that we did, are they really doing what we were intending to do? And so this is super interesting. And so product events can end up at some point in a tracking plan, but for example, they don't have to be in the initial tracking plan. And maybe they don't really have to be monitored all the time and so on. And so like, this is different to the core business events. So they full monitoring. So this, I mean, they are the most important thing that you have. So of course, like you make sure that this is tracked. This, I mean, no one will basically, let's say your company will not become unmanageable if you cannot really measure all your product events. But it's really, so I think both will end up in a tracking plan because this totally makes sense. And then at some point, you can always go through and maybe refine them and so on. But the good thing is like they live basically like with product work. So once you work on a new feature, you make sure that the tracking is there. And so they can grow over time into the plan. And that's just quite nice. And so lastly, UX events. Fun thing. So like input, click behavior, or navigation clicks, opening layers. So really detailed stuff. It's really like how people interact with the front end. And this is like what UX wants to understand. It's like how people understand basically the front end. And in that case, for example, tracking events are just one part of the whole setup. So you will also work with testings and you might do recordings and whatever. So there are different kind of things, and like data is one part of it. And this is the kind of data. I would handle UX event totally out of tracking plans. I would never define them in tracking plans. You go crazy. Everyone goes crazy. You go crazy. The developers go crazy. Everyone goes crazy. UX events, something like Heap, is really cool. Heap is basically an auto collection tracking service. So you basically implement the script on your website, in your application, and then this script is basically collecting all the clicks that are happening. And you can later then define the events for these clicks. So you can say, okay, if someone clicks there in the navigation, I want to call this navigation click, and so on. So the nice thing about Heap is like you can also do this retroactively, so that you can basically looking back, even like because it's collected before, and you just define it now. And and so you can really do highlight analysis without screwing up the tracking plan. If, for example, you really struggle to implement the product events properly because, I don't know, development has so much stuff to do and you don't really do it, use Heap as well. I can really highly recommend then to just say, I mean, honestly, what you don't want to have is like getting a feature out without any kind of tracking. And if your only chance to get some tracking is to use something like Heap, go for Heap, 100%, also for product events and so on. I mean, you can even then later maybe establish it in the tracking plan and so on. But my recommendation is basically, so take it out, my recommendation is like focus area, core business events. This is what you have to do. So let's make it here red and so on. This is where you have to focus. This goes into the tracking plan. This is monitored closely. Product events grow over time, bring them in the tracking event over time, and also put them in the tracking plan with these implementation. UX events, don't put them in the tracking plan. Leave them out. Use something like Heap. They're still super important, but not in your tracking plan. I hope this helps. Follow me. I will do a bunch of tracking plan videos over the next time. And I would really love to see you in the next kind of videos I'm doing. And so have a great day and see you soon.